Jesse, before we go to the doctor's, we need to eat lunch. I put your sandwich on the table, so come and eat.
I'm not hungry, Mom.
Just, you haven't eaten anything since breakfast, so I think you need to come eat.
I'll eat later.
Jess, do you want to get sick? You have to eat.
No, thanks.
Jesse, there are children starving all over the world right now who would love that sandwich.
Mom, can we send it to them? I'm really not hungry.
That's not the point, Jesse. Now, I'm your mother, and I'm worried about you getting sick. I really want you to eat something.
No, thanks, Mom.
Jesse, if you don't eat something, you could pass out from low blood sugar. You have to eat something.
Okay, Mom. I'll have a cookie.
A cookie?
Another session of Growing Kids God's Way. We just witnessed a scenario, Anne-Marie, maybe very common in our society, where a mom's trying to give some instruction to a little child, and the little child's going toe-to-toe with mom. We're going to talk about respecting authority, and certainly respecting parents. Parents are in positions of authority. We are God's ambassadors. But there's more to this particular lesson, because in the introduction of this lesson, we're going to talk about the major theme of our class tonight, our presentation, and that is this. In the mind of God, parenting is a kingdom issue. In this session, we're going to talk about the big picture.
And I'd also like to kind of go back a little bit to the discussion that you had before turning on this video about your prohibitive conscience test. Hopefully that has generated some good talk between you and other class members, and you're looking forward now to tonight's lesson that's going to help develop the positive side of your conscience.
We're going to be joining our class in a few moments, and then we'll be joining you. We'll be right back. I want to welcome you folks back to another session of Growing Kids God's Way. The last time we got together, we talked about the development of the moral conscience. Specifically, we talked about the moral warehouse, the place that receives moral instruction. In this particular session, we want to move on and begin the process of communicating the practical side of character development. But before we even get to the practical side, there are some points of theology that I want to present to you that are absolutely critical in the formation and the practice of communicating values to your children. In this particular session, it really has a twofold application. First, I want to introduce you to the kingdom purpose of character development with your children. Basically, what is the big picture? Why train your children with a sense of urgency? And number two, to begin to show you the practical side of moral training. What does it look like every day? I have designed this introduction to keep you close to your outline for the express purpose of keeping us on track. So with your pens in hand, let's get started by asking this very first question. What is character? Let's talk about this. Here are a few summary statements that I want to give you, and you can follow along on your outline, please. Number one, character is not your temperament, nor is it your personality, but it is the governing virtues and values of both. It is the moral monitor of your temperament. It is the moral monitor of your personality. Let's continue with number two. Human temperament is inborn. Personality is the combination of your temperament plus upbringing. Let me expand on this. When we say that human temperament is inborn, what we are saying with human temperament is that portion of your being that God gave to you. There are some who are outgoing, there are some that are more shy, there are some that are right in the middle. That is your temperament. When that temperament then is brought into a family, brought into a society, brought into customs and mores, a personality is formed. Temperament plus personality. Those two combinations are going to be influenced then by character training. So number three, what is character? Character, and character training, character is the moral quality of your personality. It is the outward reflection of the inner man. Really what character is, it's the quality of your personality. It's the quality of your temperament. Let me go on a little bit further. Let's expand this concept of character, and let's introduce now, coming from last session, the concept of morality. Understand this. Moral training and character development, when you hear those two phrases, they are the same thing. Our morality the values that are in your heart, which makes up our ethical lifestyle, our morality, in fact, defines our character. And our character, what we are every single day, whether we're in the play group or whether we're in the office, whether we're in the marketplace, our character reflects our morality, reflects what is in our hearts. So the next logical question is this: what is the basis of our morality? The basis of our morality, continuing on your outline, the basis of our morality is God's moral law. Now, what is God's moral law? How do you define it? We define it this way. God's moral law is a prescription for moral living given to mankind that reflects the will and the character of God. That is the definition of God's moral law. That defines its purpose. God's moral law is a prescription. That is something that God gives us. It's like medicine for us. It's a prescription for moral living given to mankind that reflects the will and the character of God. Number 2 on your outline, as we extend and continue to talk about his moral law, God's moral law is derived from both the Old and the New Testament. The moral commands of the Old Testament and the moral commands of the New Testament make up God's moral law. For example, after class, I would suggest that you read Leviticus chapter 19. Start with just verses 11 through 18. Here is a short sampling of some of God's moral laws taken out of the Old Testament. And when you read them, you're going to think that, well, this applies to today. And the answer is yes, it does. There is moral law derived from the Old Testament. Moral laws derived from the New Testament. In the New Testament, we have these basic precepts. Do not lie. Do not steal. Prefer one another. Do not show partiality to the rich and not above the poor. Those are all prescriptions for moral living. Those are prescriptions that, in fact, represent God's will to mankind. He wants us to put those values on and put those values into our children. Now, the question comes down to this. What is the ultimate purpose, then, of Christian character training? Why do it? Why do it with urgency? And I say that to you, young parents. In the Christian community, our collective character, that is, we together as part of the Christian community, our collective character is to be a unified reflection of God's moral law. All of you in this room, even though you have different personalities, different temperaments, all of your children have different personalities, all of your children have different temperaments. The fact is, what should be common is the moral witness. That should be standard. Realizing that we're all in process, realizing that we're all at different places in that development. But what we need to understand is the big picture. That together, we as members of the Christian community are to have a unified reflection of God's moral law. Now, God desires, to help you understand this further, God desires to be made known to the world. That has always been his desire. That's why he called Israel out. That's why he separated them as a people. That's why he said to Israel, you will be my people. You will represent me. I will be your God. Now there's a new agent, and that is the church. So God desires to be made known to the world, and this is what he has done. Now follow along on your outlines, because this is very important. He has chosen a people on earth to represent him. 1 Peter 2:9 says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation, a people belonging to God. So what was the purpose? Well, the verse continues when he says, that you may declare the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. This means, folks, he wants our behavior to be a reflection of his character, which is in fact the means by which we declare his praises, and in so doing, we are declaring his presence. What is this called? Very important theological point. This is called holiness. Holiness implies, here's some 2 key words. Holiness implies representation, and it implies declaration. Representation, we're representing God. It implies declaration. We declare God. By our behavior, by our good works, by what we do. Even more of a scary thought. by what we place into the hearts of our children and by the efforts that we take to bring about moral conformity, we are representing God. We are declaring God. That's what holiness is all about. In fact, number 4, what is the purpose of holiness? The purpose of a holy lifestyle is to communicate God's presence to the world, just as it was so for Israel. Their existence, their purpose, the reason why they were the people they were, was to communicate to the world, to all the pagan nations all around Israel, where they could find the one true living God. And so it is true with you. Now watch how all of this fits together. We need to understand that the character training in the Christian community is critically important. We also need to understand that that is why, listen, whether you eat or drink, Christian, you do it all to the glory of God. 1 Corinthians 10:31. Eating and drinking, ladies and gentlemen, Paul picks probably 2 of the most mundane things. Although we all enjoy it, the fact is it happens every single day. And Paul is saying, even with the base things that you do, whatever you do it all to the glory of God. Now, what does that mean? Let's define glory. Glory means, in the simplest form, to make bigger. Now, folks, why do you make something bigger? There's only one reason we make something bigger, and that's so more people can see it. So when we read that do all things to the glory of God, do all things so that you can make Him bigger, so that more people can see it. Now, how do we glorify God? Follow this. Jesus said it very simply. Jesus said, "Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Matthew 5:16. Good works here, and obviously not the good works in an effort to get to heaven, for in the Christian doctrine, the gospel, the saving gospel, means that we're already in heaven. But by the good works, or by our good behavior, by the reflection of the moral values that are in our hearts, we glorify God. And the key words here is those people outside will see your good works and glorify. So then what is the ultimate purpose of character training? Why this lesson? Why the next 2 lessons after this? Follow this very carefully, please. Biblical values that represent the person of God lived out in our families, the families in the Christian community, serves 2 purposes. Number 1, by our behavior, follow all these qualifiers, please. By our behavior, which is governed by our morality, which is derived from God's moral law, which reflects God's moral character and His will, allows us to define God to the world, and it also helps the world find God. That's why, Christian, that's why, parents, that all of this character training is so important. It all ties back to whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God. That the biblical values, in fact, that you are putting into the heart of your children, that when they act out on those values so beautifully, what you are doing is you are communicating the very character of God. That's why we say you need to come to these lessons with a great sense of urgency. This concept of defining God to the world and helping the world find God. This is both the means and the mission of our calling as Christian families. That the moral beauty represented by your children's behavior becomes such a compelling testimony before a watching world that they have to come and ask for the hope that lies within you. I mean, let's face it. You guys are everywhere. That's why God's purpose in the family from the beginning in parenting was so critical. You're everywhere. You are the only entity in the world that goes everywhere. You're in the workplace. You're in the marketplace. You're in the park. You're at the school. You're in the office. You're on the street. You're everywhere. The Christian witness is everywhere. That's the point. And you take your darling little children. What an exciting day and age we live in. A day and an age when so many families are in despair, they don't know what to do, they don't know where to turn, and then you come along with your beautiful children, and they see your children, and they see the comfort level, they see the hope, they see the desire, and they realize there is something compelling about your children. You know what that is? That is holiness speaking. You are defining God through your behavior, through the behavior in your marriage, through the behavior of your children. You are defining God to the world so that the world can help, you can help the world find God. Listen, parenting in the mind of God is a kingdom issue. Keep these things in mind as we move through the practical side of moral training and developing your child's character. Let's continue on here. How does all of this character development work out, practically speaking? Well, first of all, understand, there are 6 natural relationships which provide the context for character development. We all have these 6 natural relationships. It doesn't matter if you live in a primitive society or a very complex society like ours. We interact with these 6. Let me list these 6. You have them on your outline, and then we'll talk about the first 2. We interact with relationships with authority, parents, with older people, age, elders, with siblings and peers, property, and nature. These are the 6 natural relationships which forms the context for all character training. See, folks, if you could just understand, just work on these 6 relationships, all of the values, the morality that's associated with these 6, then you've got 95% of all the training you're ever going to do with your children. Because all of our moral training really is tied back to these 6 relationships. And while Anne-Marie and I are not going to be able to cover every single aspect, we can start you down the road of proper understanding why these 6 relationships are so critical. Let's begin with that very first one, respect for authority. Let me give you some examples of authority. There is God's authority, then there is parental authority, and there's pastoral authority. We have a couple of police officers in our audience. There's the civil authority, there's police authority, firemen are in positions of authority, referees are in positions of authority. The point is, we have no lack for authority around us. Now, when we look at Scripture, Scripture is not silent on this issue of authority. In fact, God is the author of authority. The Scriptures speak to the issue of authority. Let me just give you these verses. Hebrews 13:17, Romans 13:1, 1 Peter 2:13 and 14, 1 Peter 2:17. All of these verses speaks to the believer's responsibility in submission to authority. Let's define authority. Authority, ladies and gentlemen, is not the law, but it's the power to enforce the law. Authority does not mean making everyone equal, but treating everyone equitably. Authority must be understood. Here are 2 words: fair play. Fair play. You see, for me to submit to authority is to honor you, because by submitting to authority, I'm agreeing to play by the rules. When I take my little dog to the park, and the park has that sign and it says, "Keep dog on leash," there's a very good reason for that law. That law is there to protect those who are picnicking. You don't want a dog running up and taking your child's hot dog or hamburger. Nor do you want to put your picnic blanket down where your dog has left something. The idea is, in fact, that that dog stays on the leash, so if that dog does something of nature, you're there to pick it up. Now, when I play by the rules, when I submit myself to that basic authority, I'm honoring you. I am honoring you, your preciousness, your natural right to enjoy the beauty of that park. I'm thinking about you by the very fact that I'm playing by the rules. I want you to play by the rules too, because someday I may visit that park, and I would hope that you would keep that park as neat as we would want to do for you. That's the idea of playing by the rules. The supreme importance of authority, let's talk about this. Authority, ladies and gentlemen, is the genesis of freedom. This is true whether it be the nation or whether it be the home. To dethrone the notion of authority is to dismantle the concept of law and order. For law and order are inseparably linked to the concept of authority. The two are dependent on authority. To be free from authority produces a type of anarchy. This is true, ladies and gentlemen, whether it be the nation or whether it be in your family. And there are many families that you guys are probably aware of. You have seen anarchy in the home. And it's going to be tied back to a wrong view, ultimately, of parental authority. Let me just give you this reminder before we move on to respecting parents, which has to do with parental authority. How you respond to positions of authority as mom and dad will set the acceptable parameters for your children to respond back to you. If you are constantly living below the standard, your children will interpret your behavior as the standard. That is why you must live under authority with full integrity. Let's continue. Respect for parents. Let's just take a few moments and talk about this. The fifth commandment, honor your father and mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Exodus 20:12. This commandment is linked with the first 4 commandments more than the latter 5. For the first 5 deal with man's relationship with God, and the last 5 deal with man's relationship with man. The word honor means, I just heard this recently from our pastor, it means substitute presence. It is such a great definition. That's why this 5th commandment is linked to God. Because as mom and dad, you stand as a substitute presence of God to your children. And that's why to be dishonored by children is to actually dishonor God. But it really begins with mom and dad. Let me give you these warnings. First of all, this verse has a promise to it, Exodus 20:12, but there's also warnings that Scripture gives us. Here's one. The eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, and young eagles will eat it, Proverbs 30:17 tells us. Listen, moms, you know the eye? The eye. You know the look? You know that look your kids give you? Maybe you got little ones, so they're not giving you that look yet, but that, mom, and they roll the eyes. That look. That's what this verse is talking about. The eye that mocks the father and scorns the mother. Number 2, he who strikes his mother or father shall surely be put to death, Exodus 21:15. Or how about this? He who curses his mother and father shall surely be put to death, Exodus 21:17. Aren't your children happy that they're not living in the Old Testament times? That these laws are no longer apply to their little lives today? But the meaning and the intent still do. That God hasn't in any way lowered his expectations in regards to your attitude about your lofty position as being participants with him in the process of creating a life and bringing a child to this world. So the first point to be made is this. Do not let your children belittle the significance of your position as governors of their souls. Do not let your children demand of you. We know they will. The problem isn't the natural inclination to demand of mom, Mommy, I want it now, you do it now. That's not the issue. The issue is allowing it to continue without correction. Do not let your children talk harshly to you. Do not allow your children to defy you openly and have you do nothing but smile at the child. For when you are doing, you are lowering in the mind of your child the lofty position of who you are in their life. You are God's representative, substitute presence, your mom and dad. Let me get to parental authority and child training. See on your outline. Besides health and safety issues, obviously you're going to use your authority in that category. You're going to stop your child from running out on the street. You're not going to let your child play in the medicine cabinet. So you exercise your authority for health and safety reasons. But equally important, maybe more important, you exercise your authority for moral reasons. Because your children are not born with a preset understanding of what is right and wrong. They have no values in their conscience. In fact, what you folks are is you are your child's moral self-control. You guide your child by your wisdom, by the morality that is in your heart. You're in the process of training them. And so you're going to use your authority to direct their morality. Now, when you do, let's attempt to put this into perspective. When your children are young, lead them by your authority. Don't be afraid of that, moms and dads. You are not your child's pal at this point. You're mom and dad. Understand that. You are to lead by your authority. You have wisdom. You have age. You have life's experience. Don't try to rationalize with your 18-month-old. Try to buy them over to your conclusion as to what they should do. Lead by your authority. But as your children are growing up, into those pre-adolescent years and the adolescent years. Notice 2 on your outline. When your children are teenagers, by then, you should lead them by the power of your relational influence. This is absolutely beautiful, that your children are so on your team by them morally that, in fact, it's not coercive authority that brings about moral conclusion, but it's the beauty, the dynamics of your relationship. It's because you have proven yourself to your children trustworthy, reliable, free of hypocrisy, that the family bonds have grown so significantly that you are actually leading your children by the strength and the power of your relational influence. Listen, as child gains self-control through the leading of your authority, proportionate to that, you begin to back off on the use of your authority. It's not that you're not going to use your authority anymore, but it's going to be that you no longer need the abundance of authority to bring about moral conclusions when they're older. In our society, we have really reversed this thing. In our society, we have a whole generations of moms and dads who, with their young children, they want to influence them. They want to, again, just sort of buy them over to mom and dad's conclusion as to what they should do. And that's a very easy thing to do. I'll admit to you that I was there at one time. I used to work for the Veterans Administration Hospital a number of years ago, and it was a completely psychiatric hospital. To my right, I had 10 clinical psychologists. To my left, I had 10 counseling psychologists. I figured by osmosis that I just picked up all of the wisdom of these sages, all of the wisdom of these great men. And I remember when my daughter, Amy, 19 months old, we were living in Boston. It was a Sunday night. We were going to go up to visit Anne Marie's mom. And it was wintertime. And I said to my darling little daughter, Amy, Amy, let's put your jacket on because we're going to Grandma's house. And I held it out for her. And that little darling looked at me and said, no. I said, okay, I can handle this. I'm with all of these great minds. Let's see, get down to the level of the child. And so I began the process. Amy, would you like to put your jacket on? Please put your jacket on, because if you don't, honey, you're going to catch cold. And she said, no. And I said, okay, Amy, honey, you don't understand. You need to put your jacket on because if you catch cold, you won't be able to play with little Bobby upstairs. Now, you do want to play with him. Let's put your jacket on. Now, my mother-in-law, gentlemen, was standing right there watching all of this. So she just grabbed that jacket. She took one of Amy's arms, put an arm up one sleeve, the jacket over the shoulder, the arm up the other sleeve, buttoned her up. Little Amy put her hand up like this to take Grandma's hand. And I looked at my mother-in-law and I said, was that all I had to do? And she said, that's all you had to do. And so I tell you that story so that you understand that I could empathize, both Amory and I. There was a time in our life we were trying to buy her over by our influence rather than lead her by our authority. What your children need is a mommy and daddy that's going to lead and guide by authority. And when your children are older, as they develop that moral warehouse, as they gain more and more self-control, you're going to come to the point where it's going to be so beautiful that you're going to be leading your children by the strength of your relationship, not by coercive authority. In our society, as you start out with trying to buy them over, what happens is, and you see it, parents get children up to the pre-teen years and teen years, and they don't like what they see. And they begin to get nervous, and they think that something's out of control here. What's the natural response? The natural response to something that is out of control is to try to control it. And so the way they control it is with their coercive authority. You are not going to be hanging around with those kids anymore. We're going to take you out of that youth group. We're going to get you in another youth group. You're not going to that school anymore. I'm going to homeschool you. Or, better, I'm going to take you out of homeschooling and put you into a school. Whatever it is, we're looking for all these solutions. We're going to lead by our authority, when in fact, biblical authority, we start out early on. And we train our children because there's no other way to bring moral conformity to your family except by your authority. And as you input values, as they're growing up, depositing values, then as your children mature, in fact, what you end up with is a child ready to work with you, to submit to you. In fact, let's look at this transition, these points here. You want to move your children from obedience to submission. Obedience is a military word, mandate. It is something that you must do. Submission is something that's very beautiful, a willingness to line up under. You want to move a child from the obligation of doing right to the responsibility of doing right. You want to move a child from duty to devotion. That is, they no longer obey you out of duty of being a child, but in fact, they submit to your leadership out of the devotion of who you are as mom and dad. You see, folks, that's ultimately where you want to be. Let me close with this concept of devotional honor versus duty honor. Adult children, you folks right here, you are to honor your parents. Now, I realize in saying that for some of you, this may be a very pleasurable task. You have parents that you realize that because of them, the great blessings have been brought into your life. You see God's blessings because of their care and their nurturing and their love for you. The more you draw closer to God in your adult life, the more you appreciate all that your mom and dad did for you. And so honoring your parents, here's the key word, is an absolute joy for you. Because you've realized, you come to a place of realizing how wonderful these two people are. For some of you, that very statement, this need to honor, is not joyful. It's simply a duty that you have to do because you are a Christian. You will do it. Maybe it's a duty and maybe it's not pleasurable. Maybe you suffered under the hand of abuse. Maybe you suffered under the hand of parental manipulation. Maybe you had a father who walked out on your mother, or maybe you had a mother that walked out on your father. And you have those memories. For you people, honoring your parents is a duty, not a devotion. Honoring has become a cursing, not a blessing. There's probably not a whole lot you can do except this. Learn. Learn from it. You're a whole new generation of moms and dads. You're a whole new generation of parents. Give your children something wonderful. Live your life of full integrity and realize, ladies and gentlemen, that your children someday will honor you out of devotion. And when they do, you're going to give them a wonderful gift. The joy of honoring you as mom and dad. That's where you're headed, folks. Right now, I want to stop, and we're going to just take a quick break to get ready to have Anne-Marie come up. She has a number of thoughts that she's going to add to this lesson, and then we're going to take your questions. We'll be right back. Well, here we are again, Anne-Marie, in our wrap-up time. I'm glad you're by my side, and let's get right into it. Let's get some of your thoughts on this all-important lesson.
Yeah, and it really is. I mean, between all the challenge for holiness, which really, when it comes to our parenting and our children, we really want their holiness to supersede their happiness. And that's a hard line sometimes, because we want our children to be happy, but not at the expense of learning or in calling them to holiness. And you gave several good illustrations, scriptural illustrations, is in regards to what God, how he views children and their respect for authority. And there was another scripture that I came across in Proverbs in chapter 19, verse 26. It says, "He who mistreats his father and chases away his mother is a son who causes shame and brings reproach." I mean, so we really need to understand the importance that God does place on us as parents. And we are his ambassadors, not only to the world, but we're his ambassadors first to our children, so that they can grow up and become ambassadors for the Lord as well. But just the whole thing of the authority, and then us as parents, our children will never grow to respect authority if they don't understand the first authority figures in their lives. So it's an important imperative.
And not only is it an important imperative, again, it's important that you understand that the purpose that you're going to bring your child to obedience, we're going to talk about this in a few sessions, but the reason that you're going to exercise your authority is for one purpose: to decrease the need for obedience and decrease the need for authority. That is, you initially will bring your children to obedience, you will initially use your authority to bring moral conformity, but as you're depositing into that moral warehouse, as we talked about in our last session, as they're growing in moral maturity, you begin to back off from your authority because you don't need it anymore. Because, in fact, you're bringing about moral conformity. It is true for the nation just as it is true for the family. In a nation like ours, for example, when there is a high degree of moral conformity in the populace, then you need less government to bring about moral conformity. You need less laws, you need less coercive authority to take care of the injustices, because there's not that many. But when there's a decrease in moral conformity in the society, you're going to need more government to bring about the moral outcomes that are necessary for all of us to live in a free society. Well, it's exactly the same in the family, except reverse. When their children are young, there is no moral conformity. You're the ones who are going to create it. But as they are growing older, as moral conformity increases, the less you need of that parental authority. So where does it begin? I think, honey, as I shared, there is this natural tendency, moms, there is this hope, there is this desire that if you could just buy your child over to the reasonableness of your instructions, then you won't have to get into any type of correction and discipline. You won't have to use any authority, but that backfires. In fact, right now, let's go back to our scenario and let's watch this mom try to buy her child over to her point of view. Let's watch it right now.
Jesse, before we go to the doctor's, we need to eat lunch. I put your sandwich on the table, so come and eat.
I'm not hungry, Mom.
You haven't eaten anything since breakfast, so I think you need to come eat.
I'll eat later.
Jess, do you want to get sick? You have to eat.
No, thanks.
Jesse, there are children starving all over the world right now who would love that sandwich.
Mom, can we send it to them? I'm really not hungry.
That's not the point, Jesse. Now, I'm your mother, and I'm worried about you getting sick. I really want you to eat something.
No, thanks, Mom.
Jesse, if you don't eat something, you could pass out from low blood sugar. You have to eat something.
Okay, Mom. I'll have a cookie.
A cookie?
Well, again, this is probably a scenario that we've all experienced. I know that we experienced it there. As I shared in the session, we had a number of experiences where we thought if we could only buy the child over. But really, honey, in this particular scenario, what we're doing is we're undermining in the mind of the child our role as a mom and dad. We are creating in the mind of a child a dishonoring perspective of who we are as God's ambassadors. Just some thoughts real quick before we take some questions.
I think the key is in the mind of the child, and we really need to try to think of it from the mind of the child and not our adult perspective. When we let our kids talk back to us or debate or argue a point and we continue to say, but just don't you understand? No, they don't. They really don't, and that's our job, is to help them to understand the wisdom that we have. And they're not going to just yield to it. It's not in their nature to yield. But part of our role as the parent is to bring that moral conformity, start putting in that moral reason why, and in time, as they mature, then you will be able to dialogue and reason. Believe me, as your children hit those middle years and those teen years, you are going to be talking to them so much, you're going to think, why did I waste all that energy when they were little? You know, get them to the point. Right. You will have plenty of opportunity to talk to your children.
Honey, I know in the minds of some of these moms and dads, but more moms as they're spending more time with the kids, they're probably sitting here thinking, all right, that's me, so what do I do? I mean, tell me, what do I do right in that situation? Well, moms, dads, we are going to tell you what to do, but not tonight. In a couple of weeks, we're going to get to what do you do? What are some of the helpful things that can bring your child to a point actually of saying, yes, Mommy, with a smile, and bringing you to first-time obedience. But that's still a couple of weeks away. Right now, let's go to some questions. Who would like to begin? We have a question right here.
Yes, my question deals with us as adult children. How do we honor our parents when it's not a joy, but much more of a duty?
Okay, yeah, good question. There are times, as I shared, that it will be a duty. What does that look like? That means, regardless of how bad it may have been, we're not going to speak harshly, publicly harshly against our parents. We're not going to let them go hungry. We're not going to let them go thirsty. If they are cold, we will bring warmth to them. Now, why would we do that, even in the worst situation? Because what Jesus taught us is that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. At worst, in the worst possible scenario, your parents, where you are honoring them out of duty, not devotion, they are still your neighbor. You are still obligated to do that. What you have to realize by this question is that although you may never be able to recover that devotional aspect, the joy of wanting to give your parents honor, it's probably not going to be there. Don't make the same mistake with your kids. You guys think ahead. You all think about, what am I doing right now, relationally? And not to compromise, but to teach my children God's way, how to bring them to a place in adulthood where it will be a joy to honor me. So in terms of the love your neighbor as yourself, that will apply here, but also think towards the future.
I think just a couple of other practical things. You know, you still send birthday cards, you still send cards at holidays, make those calls. And granted, you wish that there could be that joy that's there, but if it's not, those are the minimums that you can still do. Because not only are you parenting for change with your own children, you are still setting an example for your children. So they're going to watch how you treat their grandparents.
And if there's difficulty in the grandparent relationship, that is between mom and dad, the adults, your children will pick up very quickly on it. Your children will pick up, how come grandma doesn't speak nicely to mommy? And you'll see a dialogue. And then that's when you default back. That's why in our family we're learning to love each other and we're going to care for each other. And when you grow up, we're going to be best friends. Remember, screw it into their heads, not just sibling to sibling, but we as parents, when you grow up, we're going to be best friends. We will always be best friends. Right now I'm mommy. Right now I'm daddy. Okay. Let's take some more questions. Who else? Gina, yeah.
At what age do you transition from leading by your authority to leading by your influence?
Oh, good question. You know, there is no set age because it's all gradual. I mean, when you consider infancy with your children, that is the zenith of your authority. That is the highest place of your authority. I mean, every decision in this little one's life is made by you. When they're going to eat, when they're going to sleep, when they're going to get up, when they're going to play. Now you contrast the child at infancy with the child at 5. By 5 years of age, you're no longer superintending everything that child is doing. That child has many more freedoms because that child has proven himself to be more responsible. Where the 2-year-old may not be allowed to go upstairs and you've got a gate there, the 5-year-old could jump the gate and go right up to the room and play, and that's not a problem because they have proven responsible with that type of freedom. When you look at a child at 10, the 10-year-old has many more freedoms because they have proven themselves to be more responsible. All along the way, as they're becoming more morally self-controlled and morally and personally directed by their morality, you're using less and less authority to bring about the type of morality that's needed for harmony in the family. So what you need to understand is it's not so much that we reach an age and it transitions, but realize that there is a transition period. Gina, where you're going to see it, especially where your kids are getting to it now, you're really going to begin to see it around 7 years of age, between 7, 8, to about 9, 10, 11 years of age. That's where what we call the rapid transition stage. That's when so many things are going to begin to happen. If you've got a 7 or 8 or 9-year-old, they are leaving the childhood and childhood structures. This is a period of calm. They are striking really silent and deep roots. They're getting ready to move to the last phase of development, adolescence and maturity. So in this transition, by the time they finish this transition, get to 9, 10, 11, 12 years of age, you will have wanted to complete that transition where you are predominantly leading by the strength of your relational influence more than you are by their authority. But just be reminded, we're not there at the 2-year-olds, but we do want to be there as we approach the 12-year-olds. Hun, more on that.
Well, and it's going to vary with different children within the same family. I mean, probably your oldest will move quite along as they're supposed to, but those that come along, that transition might take longer, and it doesn't mean that you failed somewhere in your parenting. This child is different. So you need to appreciate the uniqueness of each child that's there. And the other thing that's happening, not only from the child's perspective, they're gaining responsibility. The other thing that's happening is, you remember in the Father's Mandate, that whole building of the trusting relationship. Well, that is growing at the same time. So as they develop more trust in you, and you are developing more trust in them because they are proving themselves responsible, that all helps in that transition process.
Excellent, excellent. Just remember, the transition has to take place. You're going to go from duty to devotion. You want them to follow you out of the love of who you are. Listen, I'm going to tell you, young parents, as we've shared before, don't be afraid of the teen years. The bulk of your work is going to take place in these early years, and what you're going to do is you're going to move towards the strength of this relationship. When you get your work done early, we believe you guys are really going to enjoy your kids. And when they're teenagers, it's going to be wonderful. And we can't make any promises because we don't control all the variables. We can only tell you what our experience has been with so many moms and dads who've gone before with the concept of moral training leading them, that they have come to the place with their teenagers where they absolutely enjoy their kids. You guys be encouraged. Let's take just a few more questions. Okay, right here we have got a question. If we could bring the microphone over. Yeah.
Gary, I was reviewing the lesson on the development of the child's moral conscience, and I wanted to get your thoughts about the role of television in really training our children in the sense of morality within our culture. And then as a follow-up, if you could tell me some ideas as how we can, as families, place other areas in the life of our child, other activities to replace that influence.
Well, first of all, television is a medium that communicates not so much values that are reflective of our society, but rather values that they hope to instill in our society. We live in a society of moral relativism. I think we see that in the sitcoms. I'm not sure that it's safe to let our children watch the news. I think there's no question that television watching, present day, is probably as dangerous to the moral development of your child. Even if you monitor it, let's say we're only going to watch NFL football. What are you going to do with the Dallas cheerleaders? They're gorgeous. I mean, there's some men that can't handle that, and so I'm not allowed to watch football. But the fact is, there's a corruption factor morally that comes out of that television too. There's very little you can do. Yes, if we could all afford maybe some of the family channels, that would be wonderful, but most of us can't afford that. So what are the alternatives? I think number one, we have a series, this is a great plug for the Growing Families Ministry, we have a series of tapes called the Great Adventure series. It is just true life dramas of Old Testament characters, Old Testament stories, just good moral stories, stories of missionaries. And for example, they're half-hour tapes. And I'm not saying all this as an advertisement and please buy these tapes. What I am saying is they're tremendous resources. Another thing that you guys have to remember, your generation is a video generation. You're a television generation. We have left the generation that was typographic. We have left a generation that was a generation of readers. One thing that Anne-Marie and I did, part of our family identity, it goes way back. Every night after dinner, we would read a chapter from a story, from one of the great saints of the past. That became part of our identity. There were games that we played just as family. And yes, did we throw out our TV? No. There were a lot of other things we can do. One of the warnings, honey, is too many videos, and they could be good videos. I'm amazed at how many Christian videos we find in homes, and how many of you parents are letting your kids watch these videos. They're good videos, but they're watching too many videos, too many hours a week. There's got to be some limits. So, well, help me out here. What else on this?
Well, and of course, and that means that you have to have a plan for your own day. And it's very tempting, you know, to just slide that video in. You've got some things you want to do, and it's like, good, I know for half an hour if I put this in there, I don't have to worry about them. And we're not saying don't ever do it, right, but just monitor how much they're watching it, because it's not like even when you guys were little. You know, you'd see a movie once, maybe your folks might take them twice. But these kids get to see these things over and over and over again. And even though they're good, and some of them are Christian videos with good qualities, character qualities, what is your child actually learning from that? So it means, yeah, you have to stop and think as parents, how am I spending my time, and cultivate some of these things. It means some changing for you as mom.
Let's close down here, and let me close down by getting back to Sean's original question. just an opinion, just an informal thought that we would have, and there's no full documentation, but it's just from our experience. For every hour of moral training that comes through the television, in order for you to match it, you're going to need 5 hours of parental training in right moral behavior to compensate. They have money, they have movement, they have color, they have themes, they have characters, and the only thing you have is you. It is so difficult. So I warn you, we're not saying get rid of your TV, but we are saying that the moral influence of the television is so great. It is not a matter of, well, I'll compensate with a good 1 hour video. It doesn't work that way. Or a good 1 hour's talk. Some more,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just thinking, I mean, when you're saying all that, because what they're going to see on television particularly really is going to appeal to the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life.
And then the images are going to be stored in imagination, but that's another lesson for another time. Honey, our major theme of our class tonight, our presentation, parenting is a kingdom issue. Let's remember that. We're not parenting just for our own comfort, for our own joy. Ladies and gentlemen, we are parenting for a much greater thing. It's a kingdom issue. By the good behavior of our children, by instilling within them the biblical values, and by having them act on those values, we are defining God for the world and helping the world find God. Thanks for joining us. We got another exciting lesson coming up next week. We'll see you then.